Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Terrapin Sports Central. On today's episode, we'll be highlighting the Maryland versus Penn State football game with an interview from Dustin Hockensmith and previewing the upcoming games for this week. I'm Brendan Weissel, joined by
Sam Jane,
Michael Big Mike House,
and this is Under the Shell. Well, hopefully you noticed, or unfortunately you may have noticed, that we are not being joined by Cavit Ireland today. Right now he's currently...
but he's under the weather.
He's day-to-day. But he's not today.
You're looking at doubtful, in my opinion, and frankly, it's a lack of commitment from the sickness.
It's unfortunate. We wish him our best, but to kind of continue the odd theme, usually we're going under the shell. Today, a little bit of a look outside the shell. Tell us what we got. Tell us what we got.
That was clever. Yeah, so we had the fortune of bringing on Dustin Hockensmith, who's a sports reporter for PennLive, which is a publication with 142,000 followers on Twitter, one of Pennsylvania's biggest newspapers. He covers Penn State football, recruiting, basketball, among other things. And we were lucky enough to bring him on to kind of give us an outsider perspective of the Penn State-Maryland game this week and a look at Maryland football as a whole from the outside. We all kind of live in a bubble here in College Park. So being able to know what outsiders think of the Terps is something that we want to get a perspective. So, Dustin, Brendan, and me, take it away.
All right, Dustin. So obviously a big matchup heading into the weekend as Penn State takes on Maryland in Happy Valley. Terps coming off a tough loss to Wisconsin in which the offense basically disappeared. But tell us a little bit about Penn State. I know two tough losses to top two Big Ten teams, obviously in Ohio State and Michigan. And Sean Clifford, Drew Aller, kind of the storyline here late in the season. But what have you seen from the Nittany Lions in recent weeks?
Well, I think maybe the last three games have been pretty good for them. So the whiteout game against Minnesota at home, that was 45-17. Minnesota was without Tanner Morgan, so not their best performance. Their quarterback position didn't pose a threat, so that helped. Ohio State, they're leading that game in the fourth quarter. That's probably the third or fourth time in the last 6 or 7 years that they've led Ohio State in the fourth quarter and lost. And then last week against Indiana, a pretty complete performance too. And I think you're seeing the team come into its own a little bit and find its rhythm and find its identity on offense. It's a really good pressure defense. They've established the run game, which they hadn't done the previous 2 years with the two freshmen, Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. I don't think the quarterback storyline is going to be much of a storyline. This is still Sean Clifford's team. A lot of fans are antsy to see Drew Aller, who looks fantastic in small doses, but Sean Clifford's going to start this game, and unless something crazy happens and it gets out of control, we're probably not going to see Drew Aller much, if at all. But he looks like he's definitely a guy to know for 2023 and beyond, though.
That running attack that you talked about, Kaytron Allen, left tackle Olu Fashani. I might be mispronouncing that last name, but obviously they're starting to pave the way here for Penn State. What have you seen from the rushing attack that can lead credence to them having success on Saturday?
Well, you bring up a good point with Olu Fashanu, the left tackle. He's getting a lot of love in NFL draft circles now and projects pretty highly there, but he did not play last week because of an injury he suffered against Ohio State. He was called week to week by James Franklin a couple days ago. So there's a pretty decent chance that you don't see Olu Fashanu in this game. But and Landon Tengwall, their left guard, is also out for the season. So the left side of that offensive line is definitely one worth watching, especially in the run game, trying to create some openings and trying obviously to protect Sean Clifford's blind side. But with the run game, Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton are the 1-2 guys there. You saw before the season began, they had a scholarship running back transfer named Keziah Holmes. And in season, Devin Ford, who was a high 4-star, 5-star back in the day, opted to exit the program too. So they're down to 3 running backs, and their third running back hasn't been healthy. So it really is Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. You'll probably see Kaytron Allen start this game. I like to think that he's a better inside the tackles runner, really good vision, really good cutback guy. Doesn't have a lot of long speed. So you saw him average almost 5 yards a carry last week with a long carry of 12 yards. So he gets a little something every single time. You're probably not seeing him as the home run threat. That's Nick Singleton's job. So you'll see Kaytron Allen start the game. I would expect to see, a good bit of both of these guys. 15 carries plus a piece. I think they're both the real deal, and in conjunction, they work really well together. But we'll see with that offensive line. They performed pretty well shorthanded last week at Indiana. They're going to have to do the same thing again here against Maryland.
Yeah, so obviously, we look at Maryland football a good bit, but to kind of get your outside perspective on it, what do you think that Penn State will try to do this weekend to get the win against Maryland and attack those weaknesses?
Yeah, I mean, on paper, Maryland doesn't have a ton of weaknesses. Their stat profile is very much like Penn State, where they do a pretty good job in all areas. I think it's going to really come down to defensively. You're going to have to pressure Taulia Tagovailoa. You're going to have to make him uncomfortable. You're going to have to make him try to see some ghosts, because if he's comfortable and in rhythm and he gets hot, he is among the better quarterbacks that Penn State will see. So I think it's just about making sure that your pass rush is there. They do it in all kinds of different ways. I think a lot of times you see the front get pressure. Chopper Robinson, who you should be familiar with, coming from Maryland, has done a really good job. Adisa Isaac, who was hurt all of 2021, has been really good on the defensive end front. Deni Dennis Sutton, who's a Maryland native, as well. He's been really good. So I think the pass rush has been good. And Manny Diaz, the first-year defensive coordinator, has done a good job of dialing up pressure in funky ways with defensive backs, cornerbacks, off the edge, stunts, things up the middle. So I think it's just going to be all about making Tagovailoa uncomfortable on defense. And then on offense, I just think it's probably comes down to not shooting yourself in the foot. I think they're going to do what they do on offense and try to be balanced. They're going to try to stay ahead of the change, which they've done a better job of recently with the running game. And for Sean Clifford to not throw the back-breaking interception that he's thrown on a few occasions this year. I think if you take care of the ball and you kind of you get pressure, they've done a really good job stopping the run. They're really, really good on the back end of the defense in coverage. So I think just the formula that got them here, I think should be good enough to win this game without making a ton of mistakes.
Yeah, you talked about that back end in coverage. Kalen King, Joey Porter Jr. is a first rounder, in my opinion. Really good length, and at the corner position, I know Dane Brugler, who works at The Athletic as an NFL draft expert, has him pretty high up there. How do you think does Penn State like to leave them on an island? Because Maryland, if there is the big strength that we kind of know from Maryland, it's the weapons. Corey Dyches, tight end, obviously, but Rakim Jarrett, Jacob Copeland from Florida. You got Dante Demas, Jay Sean Jones. These are all guys who maybe haven't had the production that Maryland fans looked for at the beginning of the year, but are still all very good supporting cast for Taulia. How do you see Manny Diaz game plan to stop those guys, especially if Jarrett plays, which Mike Loxley called him questionable? But if I had to guess, I would expect him to go.
This is going to be talent on talent. And I think that Penn State has gotten to this point leaning on its defensive backfield to do its job and hold up in coverage. And they've done it a lot of times. That includes, outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., who's, a freak show for Ohio State. That includes that game. So I would expect them to be on an island. I would expect them to be in a lot of man coverage, and I would expect them to rely on those cornerbacks to get the job done. And it's, Maryland's got some talented guys, as you point out there. Penn State's got some talented guys too, and they run pretty deep. I think Penn State, obviously the two you mentioned, Kalen King and Joey Porter Jr. are the class of this cornerbacks room. But Johnny Dixon, who transferred from South Carolina last year, has had a really good year. He's tied for the team lead in sacks, believe it or not, too. And they've got Marquise Wilson, who has played a lot of football at Penn State. And at safety, Jair Brown is probably their best overall defensive playmaker. He's probably, I don't know if he's a first rounder, but he's probably a high day 2 guy. He's capable of making a lot of different plays as well. So they've got a lot of bodies on the back end. They are, I think, going to trust them to hold up one-on-one. And one thing that's interesting, I don't know if it's a factor in this game or not, but when you do that, and if you get a little undisciplined in the pass rush, it does create some opportunities for the quarterback to scramble and run a bit. So I would keep an eye on that early in the game. Even early against Indiana, Jack Tuttle, on their first scoring drive was able to do that because, the cornerbacks are locked on in coverage. If there's an opening up front, the quarterback should have some room to run.
So as many Maryland fans know, Maryland Penn State, pretty classic rivalry. Like the joke is like, Maryland has lost 41 games and won 3 of them, and so that's like kind of a common narrative. So what do you think like historically makes it so hard for Maryland to beat Penn State and to go play Penn State away and win games? And do we think that, or do you think that there's anything that would happen this year that would change that, or do you think it'll kind of be the same old narrative where Maryland kind of has no chance?
I mean, I give Maryland a chance just because you've got some weapons. You've got a pretty solid running game. You've got a quarterback who's played a bunch. You've got a quarterback who's got a win over Penn State under his belt. I think what it boils down to a lot of times is that Penn State has an advantage in talent, overall roster talent, and has more margin for error and can afford to not be perfect, can afford a mistake or two. I think Maryland, anytime you're at a talent deficit in a game, and you guys know that Mike Locksley has done a fantastic job of building the overall depth and talent out on that roster. I just think it's still Penn State has an edge in a lot of those areas. So I think that's what it has come down to. It's, Maryland has been competitive. Sometimes they've been not as competitive as I thought they would be. Sometimes looking at was it a Friday night game that classes were canceled a few years ago, and Penn State was an underdog on the road and beat them by 59. I think there's been a weird series history. Penn State obviously going back 80s, 90s, and into that classic era of Joe Paterno has built the advantage in this series on that. But I think Penn State is just in a better place when it comes to roster talent and things like that. It's just, Penn State, I would say, is in the same position as Ohio State, where you can give them a game effort, but in the end, you've got to be pretty perfect if you don't have as much talent as the other team does.
Yeah, Loxley, obviously, you said it, trying to build that talent here. From an outsider's perspective, there's outside perspective on James Franklin, as I'm sure you know. What are your thoughts on Loxley and where you see the Maryland program, in the hierarchy of the Big Ten, and where can you see them going, in terms of what Loxley can do here at College Park, kind of from a, non-Maryland view?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I went to Penn State and graduated in 2004. My first job was at the University of Maryland. I worked with the football team, and James Franklin was an assistant on that staff. Bill O'Brien, who was the coach before James Franklin, was on that staff. So I got familiar pretty early with both of these teams. I think with Mike Locksley, he's done a really good job of building that talent base up. I think just looking for consistency week in, week out, from one drive to the next. I think they're near the nation's worst in penalties. So, just making sure that you're playing with discipline and you're playing with consistency. And I think without question, you've got players now. When you've got players, you've got a chance. And I think that's where they're at. And, they're in the midst of a 6-3 season that could be something, kind of special if you can win this game. So I don't know that there's going to be any sudden turn the corner moment for Maryland, but I think it's kind of crazy if you're a coach in the Big Ten and you don't view Maryland as a legitimate threat, because they've got players now. And I think for the most part, they're pretty well coached. I just want to see them, be more consistent and make better use of that talent, from 1 week to the next. But I think on a 1 game basis, you kind of, like last week, you see the worst of them. What are you going to see this week? And I think until you're able to answer that question and get to a place where you're going to see a pretty reliable product from 1 week to the next, they're going to be kind of stuck where they are, which is, you're hoping for an 8-win season maybe, but not really a realistic shot to do a lot more than that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. When Maryland has played at their best, I think like most people would say the Michigan game, there's been sparks of that, and there's, been some very strong hope for Maryland fans, but the inconsistencies is definitely kind of where it lies. So Dustin, we very much appreciate you coming on, but we must get a quick score prediction from you for the upcoming game this weekend.
I think Penn State's going to score points. I think they've been able to do that against most teams, score 30 plus against most teams they've seen. I'm dubious in assuming anything about Maryland, because last week was really, really rough on the road. Now they go back on the road but I'm not expecting they're the best Maryland team to show up. And I do think that Maryland's strengths play into Penn State's strengths more this year than they have in years past. I have a prediction of 38-24. I try to make a prediction where one team covers by at least a few points, and the point spread from last I saw was around 10. So I've got Penn State winning by a couple touchdowns, and I do have some points being scored in this game. So we'll see what happens. But I think Penn State's going to win and cover. But if they're able to rebound from last week and get back on track, Maryland is a threat to win the game. I 100% believe that, but they're going to have to play a lot better, and I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, that's 1,000% true. If it's anything like Penn's, like the way the Terps played against Wisconsin, it could get ugly real fast. But Dustin, we appreciate you coming on, giving us some great insight into the Penn State program and your thoughts on the game this weekend. Enjoy your time in Happy Valley on Saturday.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys, and you guys do the same.
Thank you very much. Have a good one. Yeah, Sam. I thought the outside perspective was needed, right? You and I, we can talk about Maryland athletics or Maryland football for a while because we watch every game. But getting Dustin's perspective and hearing kind of what Maryland football is like and how the outsider's perspective I thought was interesting. He mentioned many times that Maryland has a lot of talent, and I think that we all recognize that, but I think as you cover the team closer, you can see that maybe that's not as true as you think. Sam, I just want to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think that Maryland has, and this is something that Loxley's talked about, is they have a lot of premier talent, right? So they're pulling in a lot of the skill position guys, where Kim Jarrett was a 5-star from Maryland. You get Jacob Copeland, a highly recruited transfer. Tal, the transfer from Alabama. But it's really now that they're starting to build up those guys in the trenches that'll allow you to compete in the Big Ten, right? The Michigans, the Ohio States, not only are they bringing in studs of receivers like Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, Andrell Anthony at Michigan, but they're also recruiting some of the best offensive line and defensive line in the country. Maryland hasn't had an offensive lineman picked in the top 2 rounds, I think, ever. And those skill position guys,
at least in a while.
Yeah, they have had. So, you got DJ Moore, obviously, Diggs. Those are all guys that are premier NFL talents at the skill positions, but it's really building those, the trenches that I think will allow for Maryland to compete. So I think when you talk about talent, that's maybe where Maryland is lacking, is the depth of talent. Penn State can have one injury, and we're going to talk about this week, to a guy who's probably going to go in the first round of the NFL draft, will go in the first round of the NFL draft, and they just replace him with a 4-star. On the other hand, for Maryland, that's not possible.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was talking about this when Cavit and I were watching the Wisconsin game, and we alluded to it as well after the Northwestern game, is that Maryland's starting lineup, it's pretty strong, and we can recognize that. But when they have to go to some backups, that's where you really notice that other elite teams, the gap between their starter and their second guy is much smaller than at Maryland.
Yeah, definitely. And Penn State's one of those schools, Mike, who, they have some injuries this week, but it seems like they might be able to replace them. But it does open up some doors for Maryland.
To go back to your theme of the trenches, I think Maryland's pass rush is the key here this week. Penn State's going to be out some starters on their offensive line. Last week against Indiana, they were out 3 of their 5 offensive line starters. This week, their starting guard, Landon Tangwell, he's already going to be out for the game. Their left tackle is also questionable. Their starting right tackle, he's going to be back, but it's going to be his first game back in about a month. So is he going to be rusty? So I think if Maryland's pass rush is able to get to them, especially defensive lineman Greg China Rose, he's tied for 5th in the Big Ten with 4 solo sacks. So if they're able to get pressure on that offensive line that's a little patched up right now, it should make the game close.
Yeah, Dustin talked about their starting left tackle. That's Olu Fashono. Might be mispronouncing that last name, but according to Dane Brugler, who's considered to be one of the top NFL draft minds, he's over at The Athletic. Fashono is in the top 5 and pretty clearly in the top 10, he says, of a lot of NFL teams' draft boards. This guy's just 19, but he is really emerging as the top left tackle in this year's class. Dustin seemed a little pessimistic that he could go this week, so it'll be interesting to see what type of impact that'll have on the team this weekend, Mike.
I also think Talia's performance is pretty big. We've seen in years past when Maryland plays a highly ranked opponent or just a ranked opponent, competitive opponent in general, Talia may throw some duds. He had a dud last week against Wisconsin. Maryland's going to need Talia to play like he had been earlier this season. You know, the performance against Michigan. Sure, he threw a couple interceptions, but overall, that was a strong performance from
Which
Talia.
I'm pretty sure hit the ground.
I mean, we're not here to talk about the refs.
No, we're not.
I feel the same way, but
Yeah, definitely. And contributing to maybe Talia's woes this week, Brendan, is Joey Porter, Kalen King, Jameer Brown. They're all going to be NFL draft picks in the Penn State secondary. Those two corners, King and Porter especially. A lot of talk has been around the Maryland receivers, right? We hyped them up in the
Absolutely.
in the preseason, but they haven't really delivered. Rakim Jarrett has kind of had a disappointing season in my eyes. What do you think in terms of that matchup? You know, Dustin talked a lot about how they're just going to leave him on an island. This is a huge test for the Maryland receivers, and the Porter-Jarrett matchup, NFL scouts will be watching.
So this is something I've always kind of, when I've looked at football and looked at the cornerback, wide receiver, you know, matchups in general. And the one thing I've always really said, my opinion, is that a really great cornerback can take over a game more than a really great wide receiver.
That's interesting.
And the reason I say that is because if, as a corner, you can allow the best wide receiver, the best offensive weapon to no points. Like, it goes with along with the theme, defense wins championships, right? And I think that this is going to pose a very big challenge for Maryland because of the wide receiver. Like we said, hyped them up, but really they haven't been where we thought they could be. Where their ranking was, I really wouldn't say is correct for wide receiver rooms in the country. And so now probably going up against one of the top secondaries in the Big Ten.
The best secondary they've played to date, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be interesting.
It's going to be tough, and I think that you're going to see Maryland struggle, for sure.
Yeah, to move the ball, I think is going to be a tough task. They're going to have to get Hemby going. But there is hope. Mike talked about that offensive line being out. Just a stat to leave you off before we move on to other sports is
we can do some quick picks, go along with Dustin's as well.
Yeah, Penn State 175th in the country in third down efficiency. If Maryland's pass rush can
it's not very efficient.
Yeah, if Maryland's pass rush can get after it, it's going to be scary valley down there for the Nittany Lions.
More like deficiency.
Ooh.
And so yeah, it'll be interesting. We can give our picks in the picks of the week segment, but I think that this game is either going to go one of two ways, and we'll obviously in terms of win or loss, but it's either going to be really tight or it's going to be a Penn State blowout. So I'll give my opinion later, but we'll see how this one goes this weekend.
I can start us off. So half the podcast, Sam and I will be in attendance at the Penn State game. We're looking for a great, fun game for both sides. And
I had somebody tell me today that Penn State is like a cult, actually. You drive through trees for like 2 miles, and then it's just there. It's like you're walking up upon.
Maybe we'll get some coverage, some live
hidden
video.
City.
Hopefully, you guys are back next week to record the pod.
Kevin McNulty, would you like a live package segment of us driving through the woods?
He might like that.
Yeah, so anyway, Brendan, we will be in attendance, and it will be a very cool atmosphere.
I'm excited to be in that atmosphere.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. Also to spend a weekend with my boy, but mostly because
absolutely I'm
excited to see what the environment's like down there, and that'll play a role. So, Brendan, what do you think?
So, without further ado, I think Maryland keeps it closer than people think, but really not that close. Because in my mind, keeping it close against Penn State, 15 points, that's pretty close. But grand scheme of things, that's pretty much a blowout. So I think final score, Maryland 10, Penn State 24.
No, that's interesting. So Penn State covers in your mind.
Yeah. Part of the reason I say this is because it's going to be freezing.
Yeah, it is going to be cold.
And raining, possibly. Well, it's going to be cold.
Stop, bro. Don't speak that into existence. We don't want rain.
To play
Maryland
devil's
fans do not want
advocate.
rain.
No. It's not even Maryland fans. I just don't
That's
want
true.
to
That's true.
the rain.
To play devil's advocate, that sounds like a running the ball game. That seems like if the weather's like that, Hemby's going to have a big game.
Did you watch last week's game against Wisconsin when it's horrible weather?
I mean, Mike. Anything that happened at Camp Randall Stadium last week? It's not a visual podcast, but Mike looks very frustrated.
I was going to pick Penn State 24, Maryland 17. We can move on to Sam. We can move on.
He has no words.
Yeah, so Dustin asked me to give a pick earlier in the week, right, from the Maryland perspective.
Yep.
And I put it way closer than I think a lot of people are.
You got to stay with your pick, though.
But I don't, actually.
But he does.
I've been thinking about this all week.
Cheating.
And the big change for me is I was thinking Well, Penn State's rushing defense has struggled this year, right, Mike? You've talked about that earlier in podcasts when you took Penn State versus Minnesota, which I told you, or Minnesota versus Penn State, which I told you was a mistake, and it was. But we all saw, what happened against Michigan. But I don't necessarily think that's an indictment of Penn State's rushing defense. I think Michigan's just a great rushing offense. And so then if Hemby's not going, it's going to put Tully in a lot of third and long situations where Chop Robinson, Maryland transfer, and that secondary. I just don't see the Maryland receivers getting open as much as you would hope if you were a Loxley and company. So I think Penn State's offense is a little underrated. So I have Penn State 34, and I'm going to take Maryland at 17. So I don't think it's going to be particularly close. But it'll be a cool atmosphere either way.
I do want to point out we've been talking about Maryland's receiving corps, but nobody has talked about Corey Dyches, who is their leading receiver right now, the tight end.
Which no one would have expected coming into this.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's who I put as when Dustin asked me for a player to watch, especially with Jarrett getting shadowed by Porter. I think Dyches could have a huge game because Penn State's linebackers are certified bad. Right. So that'll be a really interesting
If they're able to attack that middle part of the field with Dyches.
It's a great point. That's their road to success.
And CJ.
Yeah. Yep, CJ Drippy.
I think it's Dupree, actually.
Play on words there. But, Mike, that's a great point to leave the audience with. So that is an avenue for the Terps, I think, is attacking the middle of the defense. Another defense that was attacked was the men's basketball team as, frankly, Maryland is –
the hardwood, if you will.
Maryland is propping the social team is – saying that they did not allow 1 3-point make. The only team in the country.
Niagara might not get a 3-pointer all season.
I don't think Niagara's going to be hitting a lot of threes this year.
Are they supposed to be some sort of 3-point underdog weapon we don't know about?
The social media guy must have thought that they were the 2017 Warriors because he was propping that phrase. But
that graphic was beautiful.
Kevin Willard and company did get the win. And Mike, tell us a little bit about what you saw in that win against Niagara.
It was definitely not a waterfall from three for Niagara.
That's just...
Oh my God!
All right. We can end the podcast right here. I gotta say, first thing that pointed out to me was just Donta Scott stepping into that senior leadership role that we expected for him earlier in the season. Preseason. He led the team with 18 points. He was efficient, 7 for 13 from the field and 4 and 5 behind the arc. I also got to talk about Jameer Young. I remember we talked about who's going to fill the shoes of Fats Russell and Eric Ayala. And, it seems like Jameer Young in his first game with the Terps, of course, there's more games to go, so the culture and the team bonding will build. But he finished with 14 points and 7 boards. And then the other thing I would talk about is Julian Reese. Obviously, we know last year.
Non-existent.
He had foul trouble last year. He finished the game with 3 fouls. Only 7 points and 7 boards. Got to expect him to be more active on the offensive side of the ball for the Terps going forward this season. But overall, I think it was a strong start to the Willard era in Maryland basketball.
I'm going to push back a little bit on one of the things you talked about, Mike, and Jameer Young. He had a good game, and 14 points, solid performance. But this is the type of competition that we know Jameer Young can get buckets against, right? He played at Charlotte. He was a 20-point-per-game scorer. We all know that he's going to dominate the lower-level conference. What I want to see from Young is what he does when he faces up against real athleticism, point guards that can actually check him at the top of the key, making sure that he can get past the point of attack and can lead the Terps, and make sure that their offense is flowing right. Not that it's just, he's dominating on the lower levels. But I do agree, Donta Scott, great performance. I think that when Donta Scott can play that secondary to tertiary role on offense, that's when he's his best. He's not a great creator, right? He is a good possession finisher. The NBA looks for that all the time, right? Big guys who can shoot. You're finishing possessions with buckets. Guys got to be able to create. You have to be able to score off of them. So I liked what I saw from Scott definitely on Monday.
And then just another guard, going off the guard play, Don Carey. We got to hope that he is a little more efficient going forward.
Yeah, especially if you're a Terps fan, you got to hope for that.
Right. Maryland did finish the game shooting 45% from 3, but his 1 for 6 from 3 is not something that the Terps want to see in the starting lineup going forward this year.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the next part of their schedule coming up, but I think this team is going to go as far as Julian Reese goes.
It's a good take. I mean, it's a hot one, but he really is their only big man that has any
and that's
type
exactly
of,
why I say that.
Any type of real tangible experience. So you got to hope that he puts in a great great season because if you're Willard, you don't really have any depth behind him.
Yeah, so coming up, Maryland has 2 more home games. They got Binghamton on Tuesday. Once again, home game against pretty low-level opponents should be an easy win for them. And then in the 2023 Basketball Hall of Fame tip-off, Maryland face off against St. Louis, and then either Miami or Providence. I think that Maryland will be able to take care of St. Louis, and then they'll face their toughest test either against Miami or Providence.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit on the idea that St. Louis is an easy win for Maryland. They're usually a very solid program coming from that area, and they're always competitive in terms of those type of games. You see them, they're always in it in the A-10, so I think that that'll be a really interesting game to watch. And then that next game,
it'll be a telltale sign, that's for sure.
Yeah, if Maryland gets Providence, I would take Maryland to win that. Providence is the most lucky team in the entire country. Last week they won a game against, I can't remember the team they played, but it was a low-level opponent where they were up 69-68, and a guy dribbled down the floor and literally slipped. They won the most one-possession games in the country last year. So I would take Maryland to win that game.
That does say something, though. They know how to win a close game.
Yeah, but
Maryland in the past does not know how to do that.
It's true, but I think a lot of that is variance-based, in my opinion. So I would take Maryland. Miami, on the other hand, Isaiah Wong's a bucket. So I would look at, not to get too far ahead, but those are some key games for Maryland.
Yeah, St. Louis, they were in the NIT last year. They finished the season 23-12. And then you got to circle down December 2nd when Illinois and the Illini come down to College Park. That's going to be their first real big opponent. And then, of course, UCLA later on in December.
Yeah, team that won't be waiting to face a big-time opponent is the women's basketball team. This Friday, so tomorrow on the day we were recording, they play an absolutely massive game at Xfinity Center. They get South Carolina, Dawn Staley, Aaliyah Boston coming to town in a huge matchup, number 1 versus number 17. Brendan, what do we think about this one?
I think it's a big game. But
true.
Let me go back. I know it's a big game. But really, because it's only the second game of the season, it's not
season-defining.
It's not season-defining. And because of that, it allows for a lot of the new transfers, a lot of the freshmen to get experience playing against the best team in the country.
Yeah.
And that's going to take you a long way. So I think for Maryland fans, you can look at this game and say, if we win, incredible. That's huge. That changes the expectations for the season immensely. But if they don't win, there's a lot of positive to take away from it. And I think if you can keep South Carolina in a close game, as they have in some of the games in the past in this series, it's a good sign.
They only lost by 7 last year on the road, so I mean that is something to watch for.
I do feel like if they win, they will have this momentum going for them the rest of the season.
That is a great win.
I mean, I don't know if you guys were scoreboard watching women's college basketball, but Tennessee defeated by Ohio State in their first game of the season. The Buckeyes are going to be riding off that for the rest of their season. Now, that is a great way to start the season. So if Maryland basketball can start like that, it's perfect.
On the other hand, though, if you get your biggest win of the season, the second game, does a lot. It really tampers morale. Because if you know if that's your championship, that's your March Madness final, it's hard. True.
Well, that's not their championship. They're playing for the championship.
Absolutely. But if you start losing some games in the middle, it's going to be hard to bring morale back up from what really will probably. I mean, beating South Carolina is the biggest game of their season as of now. But they do have faced a lot of tough opponents, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, guys, I think it's a massive oversight by us, though. We haven't even gotten into the biggest storyline of the game, and that's
Diamond
Miller's health. Coming into today, I went to the open practice. Team spokesperson says she's officially questionable for tomorrow. She was seen shooting around. Now, this is not me, Big J Journalism, reporting. In fact, this is just my opinion. I would think she probably doesn't go tomorrow because second game of the season, you don't want to re-aggravate something. She has the same type of injury on a different leg. You really don't want to mess around with that. I can see, them sitting her mostly as precautionary, but this is also the type of game where it's nationally televised. Diamond Miller does have those WNBA aspirations. She's going to be pushing to go. So a lot of times questionable really means they're probably going to play. I really see this as 50-50 in my opinion.
Did you feel the team performed differently once she exited the game?
Yeah, so when I was at George Mason I saw
this guy's doing it all
on Monday.
Where wasn't he?
I saw, a team that really started when Miller went out right away. You saw the emotional sap. I was right behind the bench, and you could hear players being like, "What the heck just happened? Is she okay?" There was a very clear sign of concern for their team leader, right? Miller's very vocal. She's a leader on that team, probably the number one leader. But then they really started, especially once they came out of halftime, they really started to put it together. Lav Briggs started to get going. She scored her first point in Maryland uniform. And Abby Myers was so, I mean, she is such a good shooter. It really is crazy to me. 5 of 6 from 3. And the last one she took, she was 5 of 5. She was just completely off balance. Threw up a corner 3. I asked her about it in the postgame. She laughed, as a matter of fact. Appreciate it, Abby. But that's something that I think I'll notice, or I'll be paying attention to, is if Miller can't go. Cheyenne Sellers put it today as, they asked her what would happen if Diamond can't go, and she said, we're just going to rock out as usual. Now, that's one thing to say.
What does that mean?
I want to see what they do.
Yeah.
Who is that number one option if Miller can't go?
It's a great question, and I don't really think they necessarily have one in terms of, like, an alpha scorer. Now, what I would say is we talked a lot about this will get the transfers, experience. They have transfers who have experience. Brene Alexander played in the SEC. She's played against South Carolina multiple times. Eliza Pinzon has played against Gonzaga and Stanford, both highly touted programs. And Abby Myers last year played in the tournament. So, I mean, these are transfers that all have experience. So I would expect one of them to step up. In terms of a scorer, you'd probably look at Myers to really take more of a load, but she's not necessarily a creator. So I would honestly look at Lavender Briggs. She's the best secondary playmaker on this team. So heading into Friday, if Miller can't go, that's somebody who I would look to step up. But if Miller can't go, fellas, I know we're going to make some predictions here. I don't think it'll look good for the Terps.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see who's the steps up as on the court as a scorer and who steps up in the locker room being vocal.
Yeah. But
obviously, she'll still be vocal, but it's hard.
It's hard to do it when you're not
going.
But like Brendan said, this isn't like a season-defining game either way. If they win, it'll give you momentum, like Mike said, but it's not going to like set your season up for complete success. So with that all being said, Mike, what do you think happens Friday?
Ultimately, it does, like you said, questionable. If Diamond Miller doesn't play, which from what you said, it seems like it won't. I think the Terps will fall, but it'll stay close. The Terps are a talented basketball program.
So you have it being close.
Close, but they will fall.
Okay. Brandon, what about you?
Here's what I gotta say. I think the first quarter is close. Maryland fans, Friday night, hyping it up. Everybody knows it's a big game.
It's gonna be a lot of people. I've heard.
I agree. That's
There's gonna be up. Last year they had 10,000 for Baylor who came to town. A spokesperson expects it to be around there, or maybe even more. Now the problem is it's raining and it's 6 on a Friday, so people just be getting out of work. But I would expect it to be packed.
I think first quarter, Maryland probably up by 2 going into the second quarter, and then after that, South Carolina.
That was specific.
No, that's me. They flipped the script, and I think that Maryland loses the game. I'll give a final score. I would say Maryland 62, South Carolina 78.
Oh, high scoring. Yeah, I'm gonna go lower than that. I think that this one.
Go for it.
This is hard for me to say. In terms of like
Basketball score predictions are
it's
tough.
hard, but I would go 72-56. The environment will keep Maryland in it for a little bit, but I think Aaliyah Boston, we didn't talk about her, but she's South Carolina's best player, probably going to be the number 1 draft pick in the WNBA. She also has size that Maryland just frankly doesn't have, so if they get Faith Masonis in foul trouble, then it's going to be a tough task for the Terps. So I would say that I think it falls out of hand in the second half for Maryland, and it's a big win for South Carolina on the road.
One thing I do think that is also like worth mentioning is Angel Reese last year played for the Terps, scored 20 points when they played against the Gamecocks.
Yeah.
They won't have her this year.
That's a good point.
And if they don't have Diamond Miller,
it's
I
like,
mean, might be a wash.
You're lacking. So it'll be interesting to see this Friday.
Speaking of teams playing ranked opponents, women's volleyball faces 3 ranked opponents in their next 3 upcoming matches, combined 20th in the country. So that's 9th ranked Minnesota, 5th ranked Wisconsin, 6th ranked Ohio State. Those are going to be really tough matches. If they can get a win, that's really good. Way to end the season for morale. Wisconsin had a lot of off-court issues, but after that, they've been pretty solid. Nothing really happened. So I think it's really unlikely Maryland wins any of those games. So Yeah, we'll see what happens.
We've talked a lot about women's volleyball. We all know
we don't need to
kind of
keep
this
diving.
thing.
Yeah.
So
Mike,
team that had another rough one. Mike,
what happened?
It wasn't the big tournament. It was the Big Ten tournament, but it wasn't the NCAA tournament. The Terps did.
Don't make excuses for missing Maharg's squad. I want to.
I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying it was the Big Ten tournament. It wasn't the NCAA. They fell 2-1 in the second round last Friday against Northwestern. The offense just wasn't rolling for them. They were outshot 12-4 in the first half, 21-14 the entire game. But to look on the bright side, they got the 3rd overall seed in the tournament and will be hosting the first 2 rounds this weekend. So say they win Friday, tomorrow, against Liberty, then they will also play another game on Sunday.
Yeah. Mike, though, Liberty last year was the team that defeated the Terps in the Final Four. What can we say has changed this year, and how do we, as a podcast, feel about this one heading into Friday?
Well, first of all, you got to talk about the transfers they brought in. Danny Van Rootselaar, former Terp of the Terrific Terp.
Oh, yeah.
They brought her in from Brown University.
That's going to be mentioned every time, Danny.
Leah Krause, a graduate transfer from Duke. She came. Then you also got BB Donrat and Riley Donnelly. They decided to return for their 5th seasons. Hope Rose, leading goal scorer for the Terps this season. That was her freshman year last year.
So they must want the revenge, right?
They want revenge. We talked to midfielder Emma DeBurdine this week at the weekly press conference. She said this is the game they think about a lot, and when they saw that they'll be playing them this Friday, they certainly got excited for that. So look for the Terps to have blood in their eyes against Liberty.
And then
I have a question real quick. Yeah. Does Danny Van Rootselaar know she was a terrific Terrapin of the week?
Did you tell her?
I don't think
Frankly,
she
that's
knows.
ridiculous.
Someone should add her on Twitter. But speaking of revenge.
Twitter verified, actually.
Speaking of revenge, if they win that game against Liberty, Princeton, first loss of
Right.
the season. So, this is a revenge tour.
So they could play against Princeton. Princeton-Syracuse is the second game going on this weekend in College Park.
But Syracuse also could win that game.
Syracuse
They're
could
strong.
also win too. But, if they play against 2 teams that defeated them,
They're gonna be
doesn't that sound like a great storyline?
It's got to fire them up a little bit.
That's got to be a feature article.
That's a good article.
It sounds great. It just sounds great. And
Rolls
I'm
off
so
the
excited.
tongue.
Yeah. Playoff field hockey in College Park this week. It'll be really
I'll
exciting.
be there.
Another exciting thing that's been going on is, folks.
Whoa, the mat.
The mat has off to a hot start for the
Head coach Alex Clemson.
Yep. 3-0 start. That's really all we got to say. Strong. But Clemson said, in the press conference, he was like, yeah, we're not that good, which I thought was a little surprising. He did say that.
Clemson just coming at heads at the program.
He said, but very stern message. He was like, we're not that good, but
fellas,
we're going to face competition, and we'll see how good we are
fellas,
next week.
You might have started 3-0 for the first time in program history.
He wants them locked in.
But
I respect
you
him.
are terrible, so figure it out.
But I respect that message out of
same.
him, keeping them locked in.
Just hilarious, though, to think that after your first start is 3-0, you're, oh, yeah, we did great. No, you guys all suck.
That is definitely a way to motivate your team.
It is. Sometimes being a villain can get it done.
And you know who probably also said their team sucked was Coach Sasha.
I don't think so.
Let me tell you something about the Terps this week. Brendan was on site at Ludwig Field, and frankly, there was a lot to be said about that.
I'll push back. I don't think he would have said that they suck. Shots didn't go their way in both games, right? Northwestern, many chances. They squeaked out a win, 1-0. Missing 2 penalties. You could just see it on the players' faces. Just sad.
I think I can make a penalty.
I don't think you
Is
could.
that? No, that's a good podcast question. If we
got to get Cavit. We'll save it for Cavit.
No. If we each got 10 shots at a penalty with an NCAA goalkeeper in there.
I thought you were going to say we're in the goal.
No. Then it's 10 for 10. How many goals do you think each of you are scoring rapid fire, Mike?
2.
4.
6.
Cavit?
Cavit probably 8.
Cavit's 7. I'll change mine to 5. I'm going 5.
I mean, up until that point, Malcolm Johnson hadn't missed one the whole season. Then Bala missed. He actually looked pretty bad last night as well, just coming off the pitch each time, a little bit deflated. Yeah, Bala, he looked freezing.
Really?
He looked cold. It was Colin Griffith, who was wearing gloves. Maybe that was the difference. Wearing gloves, didn't look that cold, played a stellar game. Providing chances. As usual, he scored against Northwestern. He scored against Indiana last night.
If any of you
That's
seen
true.
The
I agree. Frankly, it's unclear if he touched it. But moving on, they were ranked 6th going into the match against Indiana. I would say they'll probably drop 2-3 spots in the NCAA tournament. Still very strong resume. Big Ten champs, right? The 9 seed would be unfortunate because it means they only get 1 home game.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then they have to go play the 8 seed away, and then they have to go play the 1 seed if they win. But this is obviously in the future.
Right.
Bracket comes out Sunday, so we'll see after that. But, Maryland's chances of getting a higher seed, I think if they win the Big Ten tournament, they top 5 seed, you're getting a top 4 seed. You're getting, a couple home games like the field hockey team. So it's going to make it harder. There'll be one game at Ludwig, a little bit of a send-off there for the seniors. But
so if they're an 8 seed,
they're an 8 seed. They can host 2 games.
They get 2 games. So they play the what? Who do they play first? What seed would it be?
I don't know what seed it would be, but it's like a winner of a playing game. So an 8 and 9 get a bye.
Got you.
And
then
the
8
and 9 would play if the 8. Okay. I mean, obviously,
if they win,
obviously, right.
If the favorites win,
yes.
we're going off that.
Yes,
they would play the 9 seed at Ludwig.
Yes,
and then they'd get the 1 seed, correct?
So
if they won.
So there's a play-in game. If Maryland beats the winner of the play-in game.
Mm-hmm.
Then they'd face the winner of the 8 seed match.
So if Maryland's the 8 seed, they could get 2 games at home at Ludwig. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it could possibly get 2 home games, but we'll have to see how the bracket faces that. This is all hypothetical.
Right, and so, I mean, it'll be really interesting.
I would be shocked if they don't host at least 1 home game.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I mean, you can't expect to fall that far if you're Maryland. I mean, they had a tough loss, but you still are Big Ten champs, and that usually leads to a higher ranking. Talk about rankings.
Let's hear them, Mike.
Michael House, give it to us.
Right, so I am still on top of the leaderboard at 7-5.
Is someone fact checking this guy?
Yeah, frankly, this could be voting. This could be voting tampering.
Whoa, not in this economy.
Hey, we don't
too
talk.
soon.
Stick to
sports. College sports. Let's go.
All right.
False. I actually am very much into politics, but we won't let my views be known on this pod. Keep going, Mike.
Speaking of college football, Herschel Walker. All right, I'm done.
Count them all. Count every single vote. Let's go.
I'm done. Next up behind me is Cavit. He is 6-5-1. What an ultimate turnaround for him after starting the season 0-2-1.
He should get minus for not being here this week.
He did submit picks, so we'll hear those.
And then Brendan and
going
Sam
off
are
vibes,
tied,
man. Cut of vibes.
6-6. So
Brendan, we're average.
You know what?
500 players.
I'll take it.
Yeah, somebody give it to us for this
Let's
week.
hear
So I'll start it off for us this week. First pick I'm going to take is Ole Miss plus 11.5 versus Alabama.
Nice. I have the opposite.
Once again, I'm going to bet
against
on
Bama this year.
I mean, it's been working for me. It worked against Tennessee. It worked against LSU last week. You just can't trust Alabama, especially on the road this season. After that, I'm going to take TCU plus 7.5 versus Texas. I hope I'm missing something. I don't understand why TCU is the dog by a touchdown in this game.
Because they suck.
They're 4th in the country. They have one of the best offenses in college football, averaging 43 points a game.
Overrated.
Yeah, it's played at Texas, but if that's the only reason for the Longhorns to be favored by a touchdown, it just seems like too much. And then lastly, I'm going to get Washington plus 13.5 versus Oregon. Both of Washington's losses this season were by 1 possession, and Michael Penix Jr. is in the Heisman conversation for a reason. He's thrown over 3,000 yards and has 23 touchdowns to this point so far this season.
Okay, I have a lot of the same reasoning for my picks this week as many weeks, but we'll start off with Alabama minus 11.5 against Ole Miss. Alabama once again coming off a loss. They're not gonna let this game be close. They're gonna blow them out, frankly, and we'll see how it plays out, Mike.
I wish they would, but they won't.
And then next pick, Utah State versus Hawaii. Hawaii plus 11.5. Game is being played in Hawaii.
Weather report.
It's supposed to be very windy. I don't expect many points. Also, they have to travel, time change, and daylight savings this week. It's a whole mess for Utah State.
Hawaii is also one of the worst football programs I've ever watched.
This is their game. This is their game.
Oh, this is the game for the. Do they bring out the luau?
I don't know.
For Utah State
I'm not.
Into the stadium?
The game is past my bedtime. What is that? 11 p.m. Let me give you some stats. Averaging 8.6 points away, and giving up 34.4 points away. That's not good.
That's a good program.
That's not good.
You know who that is?
107 total points this year, 11 total touchdowns, and ready for it, 6 third-quarter points this entire year. Because of that, once again, I'll be against UMass. Arkansas State minus 17.5.
Arkansas State.
Bang. Those are my picks.
Let me tell you something. This man has a love affair with hating on UMass.
It's just funny, and it's really easy to get him right.
I
have not got a UMass pick wrong. I'm going to stay with it.
It's because his high school friends all go there, so he's got a clown on him for having probably one of the worst having one of the worst football programs in the country.
Exactly.
Probably top 5. Yeah, Brendan, let me tell you something. When you're 6-6, you can look at it 2 ways. You can say, "Oh, yeah, we've had a good year so far. We're right in playoff contention." Or you can say how our wrestling coach here at Maryland put it, Clemson.
Gotta be better.
That's not good enough. And frankly, this week is where the cream rises to the crop, the creme brulee comes out, and I become the leader of these standings. So those are the picks that are going to get it done, and you're going to hear it, and you're going to gamble on it, and you're going to become like Elon Musk, buying Twitter verification. Starting it off, Tennessee minus 20.5 versus Mizzou. Hendon Hooker is a stud of a quarterback. They might have a tough day in Athens, but we're not going to mention that because they're coming back with a fury. They're coming back with a passion.
Same philosophy I had.
Mizzou sucks. That journalism school's overrated. We also have Tulane minus 1.5. The Golden Wave are, they're going to wave goodbye to all of their haters as they take another victory. They've been playing really well. UCF, not the program they used to be. Josh Heupel, Scott Frost both left. So I like Tulane in this one. And then lastly, I got North Texas plus 6 versus UAB. I'm actually going to be throwing the money line. But that's not great value for this podcast. So I really like that for North Texas. The Mean Green. I mean, how can you go against a team that has a name called the Mean Green? So I like them plus 6. And we're looking at a 3-0 week here, fellas. This is where I become, leader of the standings, and we really get after it. So, yeah. Thank you, Clemson, for your inspirational message.
If I may note, he said the same thing last week. He said the same exact thing last week. 3-0 this week.
Give us Cavs.
All right.
Pipe down over there.
In memory of Cavit. Hold on.
He is alive.
He did not die. He is alive.
Yeah, he's not dead.
Don't worry. He will be back, hopefully.
We'll see.
The Tigers, minus 3.5 versus the Arkansas.
That's not what he said.
Razorbacks.
Yeah. Going off vibes this week, I got UCF plus 1.5 versus Tulane. Sam, your pick is wrong. I'm actually riding with the Knights because that's the pick that needs to be made. Off vibes only.
We saw his picks in here so early. We should have just all each one of us taken an opposite pick of him.
Brendan, give us the third pick.
And we got the running down. Is it even a home game? I have no idea. Clemson minus 7 versus Louisville.
It's an away game, but
it's an away game.
Dabo, Sweetie, and them are going off vibes just like me. That was all of us impersonating our good friend Cavit.
All right, let's keep the energy up.
Let's keep the music
let's keep
going.
the music up.
Give me a terrific, Brendan.
Let's go!
Shut off the music.
Yeah, so keeping up the energy this week is we're actually going to throw it back a little bit to when gambling was very much illegal, actually. Maryland's first win over Penn State actually came in 1961 when they were led by quarterback Dick Shiner and wide receiver Gary Collins. So that's a very interesting combo. Brendan, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, Maryland has only had 2 wins since that win, but this week's terrific terrapin, Dick Shiner, led him to the win. He was all ACC in 1962 and 1963, way back. 7th round draft pick in the NFL, bounced around the NFL for a while, played on 6 teams. Just to give you an idea of how his career went, he was the first person ever to post a perfect passer rating in the NFL.
Holy cow.
Before it was, he played the years it started tracking.
Played when their helmets were soft.
And then later that year, he was the first to record a 0.0 passer rating. So he kind of had a very up and down career, reflected by that stat. After football, he worked in the beer distribution and copier business, but
what an interesting guy.
What a terrific terrapin. Let's give it up for Dick Shiner.
Whoa. Just to finish off the program, I have a little special thing that happened last week right after we finished recording. Friend of the program, James Gist, signed to a team in Turkey in the Basketball Champions League to continue his career. He's 36 years old and will be entering his 14th year overseas. Baby. So congrats to Mr. Gist and good luck.
Friend of the pod, James Gist. And, folks, that will do it again for another edition of Under the Shell. And, frankly, folks, I want all of you to have a happy Halloween. Enjoy your weekend, guys.